He waited for months, a lonely rancher praying for a bride who could finally end his silence. But when the train stopped that night, it wasn't the woman he had written to who stepped onto the platform. Instead, a fragile Chinese woman appeared, silent, trembling, carrying only a bundle in her arms and eyes full of sorrow. She couldn't speak a single word of English, yet in that silence, the rancher's soul shook to its very core. What she carried, and the secret buried inside her silence, would change his life forever. The prairie stretched endlessly under a sky painted with streaks of orange and purple. A single ranch house stood like a lonely sentinel against the wind, its windows glowing faintly as dusk fell. Inside, a man sat at a rough-hewn table, his hands clasped together, his eyes fixed on the clock ticking heavily on the wall. His name was Thomas Hale, a rancher hardened by years of labor, solitude, and a silence that often pressed heavily on his chest. For 15 years, he had worked this land alone. He had buried his parents here, lost a brother to fever, and watched neighbors drift away to cities or graves. Loneliness wasn't just an ache in his bones, it was the shadow that followed him through every room, every meal, every empty night. And tonight, he hoped that shadow would finally lift. Months ago, he had sent letters, desperate words written in a hand unused to tenderness, through an agency. He had arranged for a mail-order bride. He did not know her face. He did not know her voice. But he knew what he had prayed for: companionship, someone to speak to. Someone who might see him not as a ghost wandering the plains, but as a man worth knowing. Tonight was the night she was supposed to arrive on the late train from the city. Tonight, the house would no longer echo with only his footsteps. As the whistle of the distant locomotive cut through the silence, Thomas stood, his chest tight. He had even set the table to plates instead of one, a candle flickering between. Then he shrugged into his worn coat and rode out toward the small wooden depot, his horse's hooves thudding against the earth like a drumbeat of anticipation. The town was quiet at this hour, just a few lamps burning in windows, a few tired faces waiting near the station. He dismounted, his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted his hat. He felt exposed, like every person could see through him, could see how desperately he longed for this moment. The train hissed to a halt, releasing steam that curled like ghosts into the night air. Doors open, passengers stepped down, men in suits, women clutching children, a soldier on crutches. Thomas's eyes scanned each face, searching for a sign, a smile, a woman carrying hope in her eyes. But then he froze. From the fog of steam, a small figure emerged, a woman, slender, dressed in a faded blue gown that looked worn from travel. Her hands clutched a bundle of cloth tied with rope. Her eyes were dark, wide, and cautious, and her lips silent. She did not call his name. She did not step forward with recognition. She simply looked at him, her expression unreadable. She was not the woman he had imagined. She was not the bride he had pictured in his dreams. The station master glanced between them, then muttered, "She came on the ticket. Says she's bound for you, Mr. Hale." Thomas's chest tightened. Where's the woman I wrote to?" he asked. His voice rough. The man shrugged. "This is the one." The silence stretched, pressing heavier than any words. The woman lowered her gaze, clutching her bundle tighter. She did not speak, not a single word. It was then Thomas realized she didn't understand him. She didn't speak English. She was Chinese, her face carrying the weariness of miles traveled, her eyes carrying something deeper: sorrow, fear, or perhaps secrets he could not yet name. For a moment, Thomas's knees threatened to buckle. He had imagined opening his door to laughter, to conversation, to a gentle voice breaking the silence of his nights. Instead, what stood before him was a stranger cloaked in quiet, someone he could not even speak to. His soul trembled not from anger, not from disappointment alone, but from the sharp, cutting fear that he was still destined for silence. Even in her presence, the townsfolk began to disperse, whispering as they went. Some stared openly, others shook their heads. A few murmured about how odd it was, how unlucky, how dangerous even, to bring a foreign woman out to these parts. But Thomas could not move. He stood rooted, caught between the life he had hoped for and the reality that now stared back at him. The woman shifted, her hands trembling as she held out a small folded paper. Thomas took it carefully, his fingers brushing hers for the briefest second, a touch that sent a jolt through him. The paper bore markings he could not read, symbols that curled and twisted in a language unknown. On the back, in English, there was a single line written by the agency. "Her name is May. Double quotes, May. Thomas swallowed hard. He looked at her again. May, the woman who had crossed oceans and miles of barren land to stand here in front of him, silent, fragile, yet unyielding. What had she left behind? Why her? Why had fate chosen this path for him? A lonely rancher yearning for warmth, only to give him someone locked away behind a wall of silence. The train gave its final whistle and pulled away, leaving them alone. On the platform, May's eyes flickered to his, hesitant, searching, almost pleading. Thomas drew a slow breath, then extended his hand for a heartbeat. She did not move. Then, slowly, she placed her delicate fingers in his rough palm. He felt the weight of her silence settle into his bones. He led her to his horse, lifting her carefully into the saddle before mounting behind her. The ride home was wordless, the wind whistling like a song neither of them could sing. When they reached the ranch house, Thomas helped her down. She stepped cautiously inside, her eyes scanning the dim room. The single candle flickering on the table, the two plates waiting. She lowered her bundle onto the floor and folded her hands before her. Still, she did not speak. Thomas wanted to ask 1,000 questions, but each one died in his throat, trapped by the barrier between them. Instead, he pulled out the chair and gestured for her to sit. She obeyed, moving with quiet grace. As they sat across from each other, the silence pressed in once more. Thomas stared at the woman who was supposed to be his bride, yet felt more distant than the stars beyond the window. His soul trembled not because she was foreign, not because she was silent, but because deep down he sensed that this night was only the beginning of something he could neither predict nor control. A storm had stepped into his home, dressed in silence, carrying secrets he had no name for. And Thomas Hale, the loner rancher, could only wonder what it would cost him. The candle flickered between them, its flame bending as though it felt the weight of the silence. Thomas's hands rested on the table, rough from years of work, yet uncertain now. Unsure of what gesture might bridge the gulf between them, May sat across from him, her dark eyes lowered, her fingers lightly tracing the edge of the plate as if even porcelain could give her comfort in the strange land. Outside, the wind whispered against the windows, carrying with it the endless stretch of prairie, the emptiness that had been Thomas's only companion until now. He cleared his throat, the sound awkward in the quiet. "Eat," he muttered, gesturing toward the bread and stew he had set. May glanced at him, her eyes flickering with a mixture of hesitation and gratitude. Though she spoke no word, slowly, carefully, she lifted the spoon and took a small bite. Thomas followed, but every mouthful felt heavy, as if the air around them resisted, as if the very walls knew something was not right. For weeks, Thomas had imagined this night differently. He had thought there would be laughter, perhaps shy at first, then growing easier. He had thought there would be conversation, the kind that lingered into the hours after midnight. Instead, there was only the clink of a spoon against the bowl, and the pounding of his own heart. His bride sat before him, silent, unreachable. His soul trembled once again, and though he tried to mask it, the ache in his chest deepened. After the meal, May rose quietly and began to clear the dishes. Thomas reached to stop her, shaking his head. "No, you're a guest here," he said. She looked at him, confused, her brow furrowing. Then she bowed her head slightly and continued anyway, her small hands moving with practiced care. Thomas sighed. This was not what he had expected, but he could not bring himself to stop her again. There was strength in her silence, but also sorrow, and he did not yet know which one would overtake the other. That night, he showed her to the room he had prepared, the one across from his own. Modest but clean, with fresh linens and a single rose placed on the nightstand. He had wanted to give her some beauty, some welcome. She paused at the doorway, her eyes falling on the flower. For the first time, Thomas thought he saw something stir in her gaze, a glimmer of pain, or perhaps memory. She touched the rose gently, then bowed her head and stepped inside. The door closed softly behind her. Thomas lay awake for hours, staring at the dark ceiling, listening to the silence of the house. For so long, he had begged for an end to his solitude. Now another soul lived under his roof, yet the silence had only changed its shape. He wondered who she truly was. What life had she left behind? And why had fate sent her to him, silent and mysterious, instead of the woman he had expected? Questions burned in his chest until sleep finally claimed him. The days that followed were uneasy. May moved like a shadow through the house, quiet, deliberate, never wasting motion. She rose early, tended to chores without being asked, and cooked meals with ingredients Thomas had never thought to use. Yet she never spoke. At first, Thomas assumed she was unwilling, but soon he realized the truth: she could not. When he tried speaking to her slowly, clearly, she would only tilt her head, lost. When he repeated a word, she would echo softly, in her own tongue, sounds unfamiliar and melodic, but meaningless to him. The wall between them stood unbroken. Still, Thomas could not help noticing the details. The way May's eyes lingered on the horizon at dusk, as though waiting for someone who would never return. The way her hands trembled when a stranger rode past the ranch. The way she held her bundle of cloth close at night, as though it carried her only anchor to the world she had left. And though she never spoke, her silence was full of stories he longed to hear. One evening, after a long day of mending fences, Thomas found her outside by the barn. The sky burned red with sunset, and May stood alone, clutching the rose he had given her that first night. The petals had begun to dry, but she held it carefully, as though it were treasure. When she noticed him, she quickly tucked it back into her bundle. Thomas's heart ached at the sight. He wanted to ask her what the rose meant to her, what pain it touched in her heart, but the words would only fall into silence between them. Instead, he simply nodded, and for a fleeting second, she met his gaze with an intensity that shook him to his core. As the weeks passed, the town began to talk. Whispers floated through the saloon, through the general store about the foreign woman living on Hale's ranch. Some said she was unlucky, a curse. Others muttered about her being dangerous, untrustworthy. More than once, Thomas overheard ugly words when he rode into town, men mocking him for bringing a stranger into his home. He clenched his fist, but said nothing. Still, the rumors gnawed at him, feeding a fear he tried to bury. One night, storm rolled across the plains, lightning splitting the sky, thunder shaking the earth. Rain pounded against the windows as Thomas paced the floor, restless. May sat by the fire, her bundle in her lap. When the thunder boomed, she flinched violently, clutching the cloth as though shielding it. Something inside her seemed to crack. For the first time, tears welled in her eyes. Thomas froze. He had not seen her cry before. Slowly, he knelt beside her, his hand hovering uncertainly before resting gently on her arm. She did not pull away. Her shoulders shook, silent sobs racking her frame. He longed to ask her what haunted her, what sorrow she carried, but the words died on his tongue. Instead, he whispered, "You're safe here." May she lifted her gaze, eyes shimmering, and for a brief moment, silence was no barrier. Her pain was clear, raw, undeniable. Then, with trembling hands, she untied her bundle. Thomas watched as the cloth fell away, revealing what she guarded so fiercely. Inside was not gold, not jewelry, not letters from a past life. It was a small, delicate shoe embroidered, worn, no larger than a child's hand. Thomas's breath caught. May held it close, pressing it to her chest, her tears falling freely now. The truth struck him like a bolt of lightning. She had lost a child. Somewhere, far across the sea. A piece of her heart remained buried in silence. And now, here she was, in his house, carrying that grief into every day, every breath. Thomas's soul trembled as he realized the depth of what fate had sent him. Not just a silent bride, but a woman broken by sorrow, carrying secrets heavier than words. The storm outside roared, but the storm inside Thomas raged louder. For the first time, he knew this was not simply about loneliness anymore. May's silence held a truth that could shatter both of them. The storm raged through the night, but Thomas hardly heard it. He sat across from May, watching as she cradled the tiny shoe against her chest, her tears shining in the firelight. In that moment, every question he had carried since the night she arrived seemed to fall into place. She had not come as the woman he expected. She had come as someone fate had scarred, someone fate had cast adrift. Slowly, May lifted her eyes to him. Her lips parted, and though no English formed, a single word escaped in her own tongue. The sound trembled through the room like a prayer, soft, broken, aching. Thomas did not know the meaning, but he did not need translation. He understood. It was a name. Her child's name. The silence she had carried was not born of choice, it was born of loss too deep for words. Thomas's chest ached as he reached for her trembling hand. His rough fingers closed over hers, steadying her as she shook. "You're not alone anymore," he whispered, his voice thick. "Not here. Not while I'm breathing." May's eyes widened. Her lips trembled as though she wanted to speak, but the words would not come. Instead, she pressed the little shoe into his hand. For a moment, Thomas hesitated, afraid the weight of it might crush him. But when he held it, something broke open inside him, not despair, but a fierce, burning vow. From that night forward, the silence between them changed. It was no longer a barrier. It was a bond. May no longer walked through the house like a shadow. She moved like a survivor, her grief shared, her burden no longer hers alone. Thomas began to notice small shifts, the way she left the rose by his plate at supper, the way her eyes softened when he entered a room, the way she began to hum softly in the evenings, as though testing the air with sound. The town still whispered, but Thomas no longer cared. Each time someone sneered, he remembered the night May's tears had fallen into his hands, and his resolve hardened. He had asked for a bride, for someone to banish his loneliness. Instead, he had been given something far greater, a chance to protect, to heal, to love beyond words. Weeks later, as the prairie bloomed with spring, Thomas found May standing on the porch at sunrise. The horizon stretched golden before them, endless and open. She turned, her eyes meeting his, and for the first time, her lips curved into a fragile smile. His soul trembled once more, but not from fear, not from sorrow. This time, it trembled with hope. He stepped beside her, and together they faced the dawn. He had ordered a bride. But what arrived in silence was not what he expected. It was something deeper, something unspoken yet unbreakable. In the quiet, he discovered the truth. Sometimes the loudest voices are carried not in words, but in the silent strength of a soul that has suffered and still chooses to live. And in that silence, Thomas Hale found the one thing he thought he would never know: love. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to give it a like and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Make sure to subscribe and follow our channel so you never miss the next story. Your support means the world. Thank you for being a part of this journey with us.